Peru, once hailed as a Latin American growth miracle, it is now being torn apart by deep internal fractures. In early 2023, Peru was on fire, literally and politically. Streets were flooded with protesters, airports were seized, and highways were blockaded. In just a few weeks, over 60 people were killed in clashes with security forces. Tourists were stranded in Cusco, the ancient capital of the Inca Empire. And in Lima, armored tanks rolled through the avenues as if war had returned to the heart of South America. But this wasn't just a moment of social unrest. It was the violent eruption of decades of frustration, inequality, and neglect. On December 7, 2022, President Pedro Castillo, a rural schoolteacher turned leftist leader, attempted to dissolve Congress hours before his likely impeachment. His failed self-coup led to his arrest, sparking a massive wave of anger, especially from indigenous and rural populations, who felt he was the first president to truly represent them.
Lo único que le queda es el pueblo, nada más. No tenemos autoridades, no tenemos nada. Es una vergüenza nacional. Todo este corrupto se han vendido, han traicionado a nuestro presidente Pedro Castillo. Él no es comunista, no es corrupto.
The political establishment quickly replaced him with Dina Boluarte, his former vice president, who broke ranks and assumed power with the support of the same Congress that Castillo had tried to dissolve. To many in Lima, this was a return to institutional order, but to the Andean South, the forgotten backbone of Peru, this was a betrayal. The protests weren't just about Castillo, they were about decades of being ignored. Peru is a deeply divided country. The capital city of Lima often feels like a different country. From the rural highlands of Puno or Ayacucho, the divisions are not just geographic, they are ethnic, economic, and historical. The indigenous population, especially in the Andean and Amazonian regions, has long felt neglected by the central government. While the elite in Lima benefit from strong infrastructure and global connections, rural Peruvians still lack basic access to healthcare, clean water, and roads. According to Peru's National Institute of Statistics and Informatics, NEI, nearly 38% of rural Peruvians still live in poverty. The 2021 elections exposed this fracture like never before. The presidential runoff between Pedro Castillo, a rural schoolteacher from Cajamarca, and Keiko Fujimori, daughter of former authoritarian President Alberto Fujimori, became a referendum on identity. Castillo won by just 44,000 votes, less than 0.25%, but the division wasn't just numerical, it was emotional. He swept the rural Andes with up to 90% of the vote in some areas. Fujimori dominated Lima. When Castillo took office, the elite called him a communist. The poor called him hope, but hope quickly curdled into chaos. In barely 16 months, Castillo cycled through more than 50 ministers, an unprecedented rate of one every 10 days. While his own party split, corruption allegations multiplied, and a hostile Congress blocked every marquee bill. The capital's talk shows mocked him as incompetent. The Andes muttered that Lima was sabotaging their champion. Accusations of nepotism and bribes became weekly headlines. In December 2022, these tensions exploded. Pedro Castillo was ousted after attempting to dissolve Congress and rule by decree. The political class in Lima moved swiftly to remove him, but the reaction outside the capital was one of rage. A survey by the Instituto de Estudios Peruanos in early 2023 found that over 70% of the population disapproved of the new president, Dina Boluarte, particularly in southern regions where trust in Lima's political elite is near zero. Fury was rooted, not just in the moment, but in numbers that felt like a broken promise. Peru's National Institute of Statistics and Informatics, INEI, reports that monetary poverty re-accelerated to 29% in 2023. In the countryside, it hovers around 40%, and in 4 highland regions, tops 80%, for lack of potable water, electricity, or a mobile signal. The same survey shows extreme poverty at 5.7%, meaning nearly 2 million people survive on less than $68 a month in a nation whose capital flaunts Lamborghini showrooms. Health and connectivity gaps mirror the income gulf. More than 40% of rural clinics lack basic medicines, and fewer than 1/5 of rural homes can get online, a digital vacuum that turned pandemic school closures into a 2-year educational blackout. Economically, the cost of this chaos is staggering. Peru's GDP shrank by 0.6% in 2023, the worst performance in over 2 decades outside of the pandemic. Investment has dried up. Foreign companies that once viewed Peru as a safe bet in the region are now pulling back. Fitch Ratings lowered Peru's outlook to negative, citing governance risks and eroding investor confidence.
However, it has recently shifted the outlook to stable due to reducing debt.
Inflation hit 8.5% in 2022, and while it moderated slightly in 2023, food prices in rural areas remain extremely high. The World Bank has warned that continued political paralysis could shave another 1 to 2% off GDP growth in 2024. Meanwhile, unemployment remains high in informal sectors, especially for youth and women in poorer provinces. Mining, Peru's economic lifeline, is now under siege. The country is the world's second-largest producer of copper, accounting for nearly 10% of global supply, but many of the richest mines, such as Las Bambas and Antamina, are located in indigenous territories. Years of environmental degradation, broken promises of wealth sharing, and corporate impunity have turned these communities against the mining giants. In 2023 alone, there were over 200 recorded blockades or protests targeting mining operations. Production delays are now common, and companies have started demanding stronger military protection, further alienating local populations. The extractive model that fueled Peru's boom is now seen by many as a form of internal colonialism. Across the northern Sierra, the calculus darkened in March 2025 when illegal miners kidnapped and murdered 13 gold mine workers in Pataz province, forcing a 30-day shutdown and state of emergency. Only companies registered in the Reinfo formalization scheme may now operate daylight hours under armed guard, a chilling glimpse of how organized crime is filling the governance vacuum. Environmental wounds compound the distrust. In Madre de Dios, the Amazon's most biodiverse department, illegal dredges churn up poison tailings that bleed mercury into the Tambopata River. The highland city of La Arroya, once among the world's 10 most polluted places, still grapples with lead levels, triple WHO limits, decades after smelters were idle. For local activists, every new mining project resurrects ghosts of corporate impunity. Why do institutions buckle so easily? Political scientists point to 2 reinforcing flaws. First, hyperfragmentation. No Peruvian party has captured even a quarter of congressional seats in a decade, so coalitions are stitched daily through patronage. Second, a 1993 constitution drafted under Alberto Fujimori that centralizes fiscal authority and lets Congress sack ministers by simple majority without triggering new elections. Perfect for brinkmanship. The resulting churn leaves ministries paralyzed and public works budgets unspent. In 2024, regional governments executed barely half their allocated capital spending before rains swept away unfinished bridges. Since 2016, the country has cycled through 6 presidents and countless cabinet reshuffles. Congress is deeply unpopular. Polls regularly show approval ratings below 10%, but it clings to power, protected by constitutional technicalities. Efforts to call new elections have failed repeatedly, blocked by political interests unwilling to give up control.
Finally, on April 12, 2026, Peru will hold presidential and congressional elections, as confirmed by President Dina Boluarte on March 25th.
Meanwhile, key institutions like the judiciary and the Electoral Commission have also been drawn into partisan battles. The state no longer feels neutral, it feels captured, and in that vacuum of legitimacy, conspiracy theories, populism, and deep distrust have taken root. Corruption cases, when they reach court, average 9 years to verdict.
Transparency International ranks Peru 127th of 180 countries below Brazil, Colombia, Chile.
When leaders change faster than cases progress, accountability dissolves. No wonder conspiracy theories flourish. Many protesters sincerely believe that international mining giants and Lima banks puppet master every cabinet. At the heart of Peru's crisis lies a structural contradiction, a resource-rich nation with some of the deepest inequality and institutional fragility in South America. The pandemic only worsened this divide. While Lima had access to vaccines and private hospitals, remote regions waited months for help. Lima's private hospitals assembled oxygen plants, while Amazonian river towns made do with 2 ventilators for entire provinces. The virus killed nearly 220,000 Peruvians, proportionally the world's worst toll, and drained the public treasury. When vaccines finally arrived, political squabbling delayed distribution to remote regions for months. The resentment in the Andes today is not abstract, it is laced with funeral memories. So what comes next for Peru? Some analysts compare today's Peru to Bolivia in the early 2000s, a country on the edge, with rising indigenous movements demanding a new social contract. Others fear it may follow the path of Colombia's prolonged internal conflict if state legitimacy continues to erode. The one certainty is that the status quo is unsustainable. Without deep political reform, equitable redistribution, and real recognition of Peru's indigenous majority, the country will remain locked in a cycle of protests, repression, and decline. Signs of potential renewal flicker. Universities in Arequipa have drafted citizen proposals for a bicentennial constitution, emphasizing water security and Quechua co-official status. Mayors in Cusco pilot participatory budgeting apps to let villagers track every soul of road spending, an antidote to ghost projects. Even the powerful National Society of Mining, Petroleum and Energy now backs clearer environmental baselines, arguing that without social license, Peru could forfeit the global green energy boom. Yet each idea collides with entrenched interests in Congress, where 25 parties jockey for committee chairmanships like feudal lords. Foreign investors watch with a mix of alarm and conditional optimism. Yes, capital flight and security costs bite in the short term, but the copper under Peru's soil matters more than any headline. Electrification and the global battery race virtually guarantee demand. The question is whether Peru can rewrite its social contract before investors price in permanent instability, or before social anger curdles into violent separatism. For ordinary Peruvians, the stakes are simpler: dignity, roads that survive the rainy season, hospitals with oxygen, schools with internet. The slogan that echoed through blockaded highways, El pueblo no se rinde, was never solely about Pedro Castillo. It was a demand that the Republic finally keep its 200-year-old promise of equality. If that call continues to go unanswered, the next wave of unrest may not target a president or a Congress, but the very notion of Peru as a unified nation-state.
Like, comment, and subscribe.